Hey everyone, Derrick Hines here. Welcome to the podcast where I'll share with you the patterns, insights, research, and technologies that we use in my own pain and performance practice to help people improve their health, speed their healing, and increase their longevity. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy it. All right, my friends, I am excited for this one. On today's episode of the Pain and Performance Podcast, we talked to Bob Johnson. And Bob is an expert in the field of mushrooms and mushroom products and mushroom effects on the human body. And this is one of those, if you've listened to me, you know that I like my afternoon tea. You know, I love my lion's mane. I use reishi very regularly, chaga mushrooms at night. So I was really excited to dive into the questions around the different kind of classes of mushrooms. So, you know, what's the difference between chaga, lion's mane, all these like kind of functional mushrooms, and then the things that you hear of a lot of research being done, such as psilocybin and psilocybe mushrooms is kind of the class of those things that get more into the psychedelic aspect. But, you know, all of the major medical institutions are starting to use research to study these things and look at it. And I wanted to dive into all that. What are they showing? What are the effects of both of these sides? So we really kind of made this like full all-encompassing episode where we talk about functional mushrooms. We do talk about psychedelic mushrooms and get into the research around those things. We go through a bunch of the health benefits, the different categories, the truths around these things. What type of mushrooms should you add to your life for which different thing? I took a ton of notes. I ordered a bunch of things after this, and I really did take a lot away from this conversation with Bob. He's got a lot of excitement around mushrooms and the future of being able to start adding these to people's lives and the improvement in energy, cognitive, immune health, inflammation, healing, all of these things that they can offer. So if you've heard me talk about any of these and you've wanted to kind of add some of that to your life, I think you'll enjoy this episode. It's certainly a fun conversation anyway, but I think you'll be able to add some actionable things into your life from some of this information. So I hope you enjoy this with Bob Johnson. Bob Johnson, welcome to the Pain and Performance Podcast, man.
Hey, Derrick, thanks a lot for having me on. Excited to talk to you.
I'm quite excited. All of my listeners will know that how much I love all aspects of kind of tea, and certainly I talk a lot about chaga tea and lion's mane and stuff, and we've gotten into a lot of that stuff on here. So to get you on and actually dig into like the different levels of mushrooms, it's such a big topic to me. So I'm excited to kind of tweeze some of this stuff out. But I thought we'd kind of kick this off because it's quite an interesting field for you to get into. How did you end up becoming the mushroom guy? How'd you get into this?
Yeah, good question. Well, I mean, I've been in plant-based medicine here in LA since 2008, starting with my college roommate and I moved out here and started an edibles company, cannabis edibles, called I Can't Believe It's Pot Butter. We were writing majors and we just thought that name was so funny. So at the end of the day, after we'd been working on whatever writing comedy project we're working on, to pay our rent, we just sit around and talk about how, the different products that we could have under I Can't Believe It's Pot Butter. And after about a month, we're like, we need to either do this or just stop talking about it. And so went to the grocery store, got some pen and paper and first sketched out our first company together. And that was a wild ride in the cannabis industry in California for 10 years. I really watched the entire evolution of, a market going from underground, black market, whatever you call it, to, fully legal, mainstream. And that was a big shift for me. I went to high school in Texas, where it's a felony for like a seed of cannabis. And I never thought that made any sense, even as a kid. And so it was really, fascinating to be a part of that change. And so naturally, in 2018, when we sold our company, I was looking for something else to do that made me excited. I love product development and building brands and working with young entrepreneurs. So we started a white label manufacturing company called Custom Capsule Consultants. And at the time, hemp and CBD had just become federally legal. So there's a ton of people rushing into that market. And my experience at Tetra Labs, which was the next cannabis company that I formed and ran for 9 years, what our specialty was making medicine, like medicinal type of form factors for cannabis, right? And especially because it was in the early days, we thought maybe naively that we would have like more protection legally if we were making something that was as medicinal as possible, and we weren't making chocolate bars with cartoons on them that appealed to kids or knocking off existing brands and copyright infringement. But we made soft gel capsules and little breath sprays and stuff that looks like medicine.
Yeah.
And, my look into the future was that cannabis or mushrooms, all these things are going to be treated as real medicine. You don't take aspirin in a chocolate bar with 700 calories. It kind of defeats
Right.
the purpose. But mushrooms is something that as a white label manufacturer, as a supplement manufacturer, people would contact me with all sorts of different supplements, ingredients, plant botanicals that they wanted to put into products. And so it got me naturally researching all these ingredients, trying to understand, the amounts, the sourcing and the quality of these different ingredients. And so there was a few that kept coming up. Ashwagandha was really popular for a few years, still is. Elderberry, and then lion's mane mushrooms. People kept contacting me and wanting to make cognitive enhancing products that contained lion's mane. And I'm just naturally want to know everything that I can about something that interests me. So I just started going to mushroom conferences, introducing myself to mycologists. They're doing all sorts of really interesting research. I started researching and writing about mushrooms for Rolling Stone. And yeah, that's just like the kind of way I like to get into things. I started buying every mushroom product that was advertised to me on Instagram or Google. I just wanted to know everything that's out there.
Well, that was, I think, the first way that I came across your stuff was the Beyond Psilocybin article that you did for Rolling Stone. And I've been, kind of being a research nerd, constantly trying to find what are the things that are going to move the needle on different treatments. Certainly in our office, we treat pain, and we try and treat pain by thinking deeper. I don't really like the term thinking outside the box, but let's think a little bit deeper than the superficial. This is the way we've always done it, so that's what we're going to do. And whenever I have quite a few friends who are in the military space, and when they started talking about different treatments for PTSD and stress and anxiety, and they started bringing up things like psilocybin and stuff, it was an interesting, somebody's thinking, somebody's paying attention to this. And somewhere along the way, I came across that article, and then we got connected. And so it's always one of those, you're like, okay, this is supposed to happen. Like this was kind of meant to be. Where do you think, this is kind of a curveball for you, but where do you think your like intrinsic drive to find some of these more, I'll use the word natural, though I'm not terribly happy about it, natural remedies for health that include, plant medicines and stuff. Where do you think that came from? Was that something that was instilled in you? Was that something your family kind of leaned towards?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. Early on, I always wanted to be a writer. In high school, I read a lot, wrote a lot, and I got really excited about the writers from the beatnik generation, like Jack Kerouac and William Burroughs, Allen Ginsberg. And I think that what started my interest in cannabis and mushrooms wasn't as much about like the the psychedelic part of it or the psychoactive part of it. It was just the philosophy and the theology and the deeper thinking, like you mentioned, that was going on in the writing of these authors, you know, and it was World War II or post World War II, where, you know, they were just looking for new ways to think. And, you know, this sort of way of thought led to the whole like hippie revolution and the 60s. And, you know, that era really fascinated me as well. You know, I just always kind of felt like that, you know, war and capitalism and so on, you know, were not something that I've supported, and you know, that the history of you know, Nixon versus the hippies, you know, I think was kind of the catalyst for me. Like, I got to try what this stuff is about. If Nixon's against it, it must be awesome, you know. But you know, more seriously, like later in life, you know, when my parents, you know, finally kind of accepted what I was doing and trying to understand more about cannabis, and I think the mainstream acceptance really helped them. You know, my mom explained to me, I've got like 30 cousins, right? Big Catholic family. And she explained to me that every one of my cousins, my sister, you know, my whole family and my whole generation, at some point or another has been on antidepressants. And I was the one exception that I've never taken antidepressants. But, you know, she said, you know, maybe you were, you know, kind of self-medicating with your own alternative stuff. And, you know, that really got me thinking, oh, maybe I do have some genetic predisposition towards depression or anxiety. And this is what's been helping me all along and why I haven't, you know, chosen the pharmaceutical route.
Yeah, there was some kind of deeper direction to get you to some of that stuff. I think sometimes we do things based on signals that our body is a little bit smarter than we are, and we just kind of find ourselves, if we're paying attention, in the right place. We've gotten really good in today's age at ignoring our body's signals. So anything that makes that better, I think, is a good thing, and that's where I find some of this stuff is, in a lot of ways, it connects us more with our body. It connects us more with like the kind of brain and the signals that are coming from our body. Certainly there's a large class of what we're talking about in terms of, you know, even in mushrooms, but, you know, if you go even higher up to kind of plant medicine, you're like, I mean, this is Pandora's box almost. Let's stay on mushrooms a little bit, because I do think there's kind of like a couple of classes of mushrooms where we could kind of separate it. How do you separate mushrooms? Because if somebody asks you that, that's just this massive topic. So how do you tweeze out like the different versions or effects of mushrooms?
Right. Yeah. With any kind of emerging market, even though mushrooms have been used in medicine basically since humans have been around, Chinese medicine, you know, there's icemen, you know, like cavemen that were found like frozen in glaciers with mushrooms in their satchels. But there's basically three different categories of mushrooms as I see it. One is like your edible gourmet mushrooms that are, you know, your pizza toppings or go in your stir fry. And by the way, you know, there's plenty of studies that show even having edible mushrooms like that in your diet shows like better cognitive function, less predisposition towards neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia. So you got your edible mushrooms, and then Microboost, our functional mushroom brand, there's three things or three names for functional mushrooms. Typically, you'll hear it called functional, medicinal, or adaptogenic, and that's all really the same thing. While some of them do have a good flavor, like lion's mane I mentioned earlier, can actually be prepared pretty well and is pretty tasty. But typically people are using functional mushrooms for medicinal benefits, whether that's cognitive enhancement with lion's mane, energy boosting and like respiratory health with cordyceps, or a lot of immunity, inflammation, even studies showing like anti-cancer properties of mushrooms like turkey tail, chaga, and reishi. And then so that's the second category, and you know, just a huge array of research and different functions from different mushrooms that help for specific ailments or just general health and well-being. And then you have the psychedelic mushrooms, right? Those are the ones that grow naturally, are really easy to grow, in your home, and now, similar to cannabis, are starting to make that move, city by city, state by state, starting with decriminalization. Now states like Oregon and Colorado have legalized it for medicinal use, like therapeutic sessions with people that qualify. And then my prediction is it'll be similar to cannabis at some point. It'll be available for anyone 21 and up. Make a adult decision about that.
Yeah, what's your on the let's stay on the psychedelic for just a minute. What's your thoughts on that? How is that best used? Because I know a lot of it's kind of, at least when we start looking at research around it, they're trying to pair it with like psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, anything in that world. So we're kind of giving you the compound to help make the change, but then we're trying to follow that up with the activity that might make a change. What do you see or have heard that's optimal on that front of using those for health, life, mental improvement?
Well, I mean, I think one misnomer of supplements in general is that I work with tons of supplement brands. A lot of marketing would have you believe, like CBD, I think really was not as successful as it could have been in the United States because of mismanaged expectations, right? And, marketers were having people think, if you take my CBD tincture, you're going to jump out of your wheelchair and be Mary Lou Retton, down the church aisles. And, if it makes your arthritis go away, then they feel like, it didn't do enough for them. But so I think that, that education and expectations is really key. And I say that because while, psychedelics, I believe, are one of the most powerful natural tools we have to inspire change in our lives and in our habits, the one danger is marketers or people believing that, there's some sort of magic pill or magic substance or compound that is going to take away your PTSD or your eating disorder. I mean, the change has to come from the individual. However, the tool is definitely very powerful. And with that power comes great responsibility, right? Like Spider-Man. And some medical conditions, for example, bipolar, schizophrenia, they really suggest like psychedelics probably not the tool for you to help with those ailments.
Yeah, what's the marketers ruin everything? I think that I had a discussion yesterday with somebody who kind of said the exact same thing in terms of like overselling the changes that could be made specifically with chaga. It seemed like chaga became like the darling of the mushroom world in the last, I don't know, maybe year or so. You probably know more than me. But he was saying that it seemed like, if you ask the marketers, hey, should I use, chaga for, this? Yeah, it'll fix that. Should I use it for this? Yeah, it'll fix that. And he was like, we're doing exactly what you said, a disservice to the people, because if you don't know what to expect, that it is, an aid to what you're currently doing, and then you may stop something that's actually beneficial because you were expecting something different. You were expecting, an incorrect outcome.
Yeah, so when I really started researching mushrooms, and I think one way that it's become so popular is this concept of microdosing, right? So, and I think like cannabis edibles, I made cannabis edibles for a decade, and so many people, especially older folks, my friends and family, they're like, I had a cannabis brownie when I was in college, and it was terrible, and I had to go to the ER or whatever. And, that's about your dosage. It's like, I say that edibles don't work until you talk shit about them. Right. So, cause once you have a bite of it, so many people's experience is like, oh, I don't think this was really working. Maybe it's a dud. Maybe I should have a little bit more. And then, an hour later, it's way too much. So that was something that I really wanted to alleviate, because I think that a lot of people could get benefits from it, but they're going to, have a negative connotation because of, kind of an unmeasured experience. So I think microdosing has got a lot of people's attention because, you're not losing your mind or hallucinating. But rather, there's a lot of research that shows that even, in small amounts where you feel no psychoactive effect, it can have the ability to help you rewire your brain, essentially.
Let's dig into that. What, like, when we're talking about microdosing, what would be the what compounds is it done with the most, and then what's the amounts that fall into the microdosing category?
Yeah, so great question. So, one of the first things that I asked these mycologists as I started going to these mushroom events and trying to educate myself the most, right? And so I met a group called Hyphae Labs, and they're out of Oakland. And Oakland was one of the first cities in America where mushrooms were decriminalized. So that gave them the legal ability to test the potency of psychedelic mushrooms. Right? And just like cannabis, there's some that's super strong, and THC can vary between 2 and 30%. Similarly, mushrooms are the same way. So I asked their lead scientist, like, what's the variation? If you take 1 gram of mushrooms and it's like the strongest mushroom you've ever tested or the weakest one, what's the difference? They're like, well, that's like 20x difference, right? And so a lot of people base their microdosing regimen based on the weight of a dry mushroom. I think that this is, in general, maybe fine as long as you have a potency that is, about average and you're used to that particular strain. But we take it a step further and, are really testing these things to understand the active levels. But, in general, the dry weight for a microdose is anywhere from like 50 milligrams or, 1/20th of a gram to like 250 milligrams or a quarter of a gram. And the average potency of a mushroom, it's way different than THC in cannabis, whereas, it can be an average 15-20%. The potency or the psilocybin and psilocin and the actual active amounts in mushrooms on average are less than 1%. So if you have, a full gram of mushrooms, the actives in there are like 0.5%.
So the microdose would, even though that the gram has that low potency, you would still be breaking that down into like the 50 milligrams for it to be a microdose.
Yeah, Paul Stamets is probably the most famous mycologist in America, and he really defines microdosing as what is called subperceptual. So you take it and, a microdose by his definition is like you're not going to feel anything consciously, for lack of a better word. But I think that, most people, especially in the supplements world or taking any sort of thing, you want to feel something to know that it's working. And so in my experience, it seems like 200 to 300 milligrams is generally what the public, that I've, interview and talk to for the Rolling Stone pieces takes. And that's just breaking that sub-perceptual threshold. And so again, you're not going to, see your dead grandmother coming out of the air conditioning vent, but rather, for me, I think it just gives me a little more awareness in the moment, right? And so for me, I think the biggest change has been slowing down my awareness and making me more conscious of the way that I react, right? And it's a cliche that you can't control other people's actions, but you can control your reactions. A lot easier said than done, Derrick.
Right.
But for me, when I was microdosing, then I first started to notice that maybe this was helping me was situations where I'd normally be frustrated or, have some reaction to something outside of my control, then I started to realize like, oh, I'm not annoyed by that, or I'm not frustrated by that. What's going on? Oh, I took that microdose this morning, and so I think that awareness made me realize that it's a choice on how I react, and so if I continue to choose something that is, ruining my day or making it, even 1% worse, like, why am I doing that to myself? And so, yeah, that's for me, like, really kept the momentum going of like, what else can these mushrooms do?
How
And
much research is currently being done on I know, there's quite a bit on PTSD, and I'd love to get your thoughts on that. How much is being done on microdosing? What are they doing research on that for?
well, I think the reason why we're talking about mushrooms so much is because of the massive amounts of money that are being spent on researching, and the publicly traded companies, even the privately traded companies that have raised millions or hundreds of millions of dollars are not making any money right now. The only way really to make money is to like train future psychedelic therapists, but all this research that's being done is primarily to make a patentable compound that mimics nature but is slightly different, because you can't patent nature, you can't patent psilocybin. But I think these companies, they all want to make a compound that they could sell to a pharmaceutical company and get rich. So there's massive amounts of research. They're of the top five psychedelic research companies in the world. They're spending between 25 and 90 million dollars a quarter on research, and their revenue, the highest revenue of anyone from 2022, was $30,000 a year. You know, so I think that obviously they're putting out a ton of press releases. They're trying to do seemingly comedic stuff to me, where it's like they're trying to take whatever or identify what is in psychedelic mushrooms that is improving lives, making people, be able to be more impressionable to change, but they want to find a way to take out the psychedelic part of it too. And
Yeah.
so if there's a way to do that, then, that seems like maybe a pharmaceutical gold mine, right? Like, well, we got all the benefits, but without any of the potential dangers.
What do you think about that? Because that's interesting to me. I kind of relate that to like I have patients who have bought like CBD, and they'll tell me like, oh, they took the bad part out. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about, the bad part? And they're like, the THC part. And especially if we're talking about the nervous system, I'm like, well, then you took out the nervous system, the largest nervous system impact. So like some of this is just us trying to take some of these things and make them match our values by taking out the part that we don't feel good about. I don't know that I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion about it is, it's like, well, go for something else rather than this stuff that's already naturally, has these benefits, and also are tied obviously somehow to the psilocybin that, in extreme examples can create these hallucinations, right? So there's an interesting couple of bit of vocab for your listeners, right? Psilocybin and mushrooms like lion's mane do two things. One is called neurogenesis. That's like the formation of new brain cells. When my mom would catch me smoking weed as a teenager, she'd say, "You're going to lose those brain cells, and they're never coming back." But now, with lion's mane and psilocybin, mom, they're coming back. But the other thing is neuroplasticity, right? And that's forming new neural connections. In extreme cases, with a lot of psilocybin, that can lead to something called synesthesia, right? That's where you can taste color or see music. And, you have these senses crossing in ways that aren't normally crossing with our normal brain function. So that's an extreme case, but, I think the microdosing part of it, or even the lion's mane part of it, is that moment where, for me, I'm making a choice to, either be frustrated or, find another way to react to things outside my control. So when you're trying to like take one part of that without the other, I'd be really impressed if that's something that can be done. But I mean, I think the motivation, what is kind of like the central theme of all my writing, is that most motivation is about money, and what I find particularly fascinating about capitalistic, money-driven uh, uh, impetus in mushrooms is that it's about a compound that makes you question, the, you know, life, God, capitalism, all of these things. So that's what I find, particularly interesting in our world today, and that trying to determine like who is really being authentic, or is whatever they're saying just about forwarding their own financial gains.
Right. Yeah. That's ironic that we're doing that with these compounds. That quite comical that it has ended up in that. So let's go through like how should people listening to this use that information that some of these can stimulate neuroplasticity. They can stimulate neurogenesis. So in our world, obviously, we're constantly trying to get people to process sensations differently. We're trying to stimulate neurogenesis in a lot of different ways from a healing standpoint. So if somebody's listening to this and they're like, "That's great. How do I put this in my life?" How do you recommend that? What's the use case for these things for people?
Yeah, people ask me that all the time, and there are some microdosing regimens out there. Like Paul Stamets says, take them 4 days on, 3 days off, and even combines. He has a Stamets stack with lion's mane and niacin, because lion's mane actually it can enhance some of those neurogenesis, neuroplasticity properties of psilocybin. So, I mean, the reason why any microdosing regimen has days on and days off is just because you can build a tolerance to it otherwise.
Yeah.
But with all things supplements, one for legal reasons, like you really can't make any sort of medical claims. But for more importantly, like on a person to person level, I just wouldn't promise anybody that what is true for me or true for somebody else is going to be true for them, whether in the effect or the aftermath or the specific dosage, right? So with functional mushrooms or with anything that we make, CBD, I just always recommend, hey, start with a serving of one pill, one gummy, one cup of coffee, 100 milligram or 50 milligram, psychedelic microdose, and kind of build from there. And, the more awareness that you have to it, I think the more you're going to really learn what works for you. I saw one company that was selling like a microdosing journal, right? And as a writer too, I really appreciated that, right? You're going to sit down, whether at the beginning of the day, setting your intentions, the end of the day, kind of reflecting on how your day went. The more work that you put in, I think, is the more that you're going to get out of it.
You bring this comes to mind because I love that idea of like, I think we do this with all supplements is like, when I have patients who ask me, I'm like, it's not necessarily that I have to give you the answer of when to start, but then you're going to need to know when to stop, when to like back off. And if you're not tracking and you don't have some way of paying attention, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, to paying attention to your body and your sensations and your feelings, then you're not going to really know how much is changing around this stuff. What are the current laws across the country on microdosing or having access to microdosing?
Well, I mean, federally, it still remains a Schedule 1 drug, which, by the way, is higher schedule than cocaine, heroin, methamphetamines. So that's unfortunate. But on a state by state level, Oregon has decriminalized all drugs and has legalized psilocybin for medical psycho-assisted therapy. Same with Colorado, and then there's a handful of cities in California. I believe it's Arcata, Oakland, Santa Cruz that have decriminalized. And decriminalized, it doesn't mean legal. It just means that the police, that's their lowest priority of enforcement. And this has led to, mushroom churches opening in places like Oakland, even gas stations and some smoke shops that have it on the shelf now, and people are more brazen with it. But MDMA actually, I think, is going to be the first psychedelic or psychoactive ingredient that is federally legalized. MAPS, which has been around since the 80s, has really been forwarding that for therapy and in veterans and people with PTSD. And so there's other states, similar to cannabis. I think once one state pushes for it, then there a lot of people are following suit. California just had a bill vetoed by Governor Newsom, but California also lost a legal cannabis vote in a midterm election originally in 2010. But it's all progressive. And when I first went, I actually was in Colorado the day after they voted for decriminalizing psilocybin in 2020, I think it was. And I was I met all the activists that had worked on that bill, and they honestly said, like, we did not think this was going to pass at all, and it passed by like 50.1% or something like that. We also, Denver also criminalized homelessness by like a vote of 76% that same election. So, it's wild. But
so right now, if somebody's trying to, if somebody's interested in some of the benefits, basically, if you're not in one of those areas, you have to take a trip. You have to fly somewhere. I say take a trip, pun intended. But you have to go somewhere to get access to it for legal purposes right now.
Right. To legally seek it out, that's right. And in Oregon, I lived there before I went to school there. It's one of the poorest states in America, and the psychedelic treatment with 3.5-4 grams of mushrooms there right now costs $3,500. And there was an article recently that there's a long waiting list at these treatment centers, but a very small percentage of the people are actually Oregon residents. So, I think that in the long run, the consumer is really what dictates the market, and if you have medical activists that are saying, this is the only safe way to do it. If you don't have a guide, you're in for a bad time. I think that maybe people's first time they're going to try that because of whatever trepidation, they really want some guidance. But when you can go online or on social media and find someone making a mushroom chocolate bar and selling it from anywhere from $30 to $75, I think that that's going to be a lot easier, and it's a lot better access. The odds of these treatments being covered by insurance anytime soon are pretty unlikely, and it's not just the 1% in this country that need mental health guidance.
Yeah. How safe are the psychedelics? You mentioned there's certain classes of people that should probably stay away from some of these things, but in general, what's the safety profile or the risk of doing some of the psychedelic versions?
Well, that's why I always say start slow. If you've never done it before and you start with with 7 grams, that's probably going to be way too intense for almost all people. So yeah, I'll always start slow. There is obviously some merit to having a guide right now. Historically and religious and ancient ceremonies, this person is called a shaman or a trip sitter, someone who has experience that, also has experience in guiding people through their own shit that that'll come up and that they deal with in these experiences that can be, really healing and transformative. So while I think that it's kind of overpriced for most people for guided therapy, the concept of having somebody there to watch out for you is as old as time and a good idea.
Yeah, I have had probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 patients who, left for an extended period of time and then come back. And, whenever I would talk to them, you were like, you're different. What's going on? And they're like, look, I feel better. I feel good. Pain's better. Even, I still have something in there, but it's not affecting me nearly like it was. And I'm just in a good place. And then, after some digging, they've come out that, they went and in different versions did some form of therapy using mushrooms. And I think in every one of those cases, I don't blame them. They probably didn't want to just jump and come out and tell their doctor that they were going to do some of that stuff. But all of them, it was very interesting how much more at peace they were with dealing with some of the health issues that they had. And one of it made me realize just how much our pain and healing is affected by our nervousness or worry about the pain and healing itself. What does this mean for my future? What does this mean for my life if this doesn't get better? Those little thoughts that never really come up, but I think they're kind of bubbling underneath the surface. Whenever people became at peace with that, it was like everything seemed to go much faster. They got healthier quicker. They felt better and had more, maybe more fun and more acceptance of like making those changes. It was very interesting to work with people before and after some of these therapeutics.
Yeah, I think that was one of the main reasons that got me coming back to these mushroom conferences. I joke that there's really no small talk in mushrooms. I have a booth with our Micro Boost, mushroom company, and people will walk up to me and they'll say like, "Hi, is this your mushroom company?" I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "I'm bipolar." I'm like, "I'm Bob." Nice to meet you. But people get really fast into it. The first Science of Psychedelics conference I went to, I met really beautiful young woman, or maybe middle-aged woman, who had a functional mushroom company, and I just asked her if she had ever microdosed psychedelic mushrooms. She started immediately crying and telling me about how she has a regimen. It was super small, like 55 milligrams, and she, after a month, got over a body dysmorphia. This woman looked like Barbie, and she thought that she was, overweight or ugly or whatever it was. And that I think the key takeaway is that mushrooms help you love yourself, and starting with that makes it easier to deal with other people, makes everything in life so much more acceptable. Just by loving and accepting yourself. So yeah, that's why I just am addicted to this mushroom industry, and I don't want to see it corrupted or just run by hedge funds, similar to how cannabis legalization has worked.
Yeah, that's massive. I don't know that I've ever heard it said that way, that this is something that can help you love yourself. Like how much would that change if we give access to people to love themselves more? Like that's the campaign. That's the answer. You can't say no to that.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Let's Bob, kind of shift gears a little bit into kind of the functional mushroom world a little bit. and talk about how some of these can affect people. Like I was saying at the beginning, I started drinking chaga tea, let's say, I don't know, 6-7 years ago at night. And I grew up having, people have heard me tell this story. I had pretty severe sinus issues as a kid, and I was away from Louisiana for a long time. And then whenever I came back, one of the things that actually was on my radar was I was quite worried about dealing with that again, like every year dealing with sinus infections and stuff like that. And so, I'm sure there's a lot in this, and I've done a lot and I've talked about it on here. But one of the things is basically every day now, on some level, I am taking in at least some functional mushroom, whether that's chaga, lion's mane, turkey tail, reishi you talked about. Something is in my diet every single day. But my nightly tea has been like chaga, a little bit of local honey, some apple cider vinegar, and I've given that to friends. And one, they start sleeping better, they start feeling better, but they're just like, man, I just feel really, really good. So maybe it's just because I'm sleeping better, and that's all I needed. Maybe there's some deeper implications, but let's go into the different functional mushrooms and what they can be used for, what they can help with. I know they don't treat anything specifically, but what anecdotally do we see? I know each of them has a little bit different benefit profile.
Yeah, there's a ton of research out there right now that's happening. I think a lot of baby boomers especially are turning to mushrooms for the cognitive enhancing properties. I had 3 out of my 4 grandparents, suffered with dementia, and I know their children don't want to go through the same thing. So lion's mane, I think it has a really cool name too, which doesn't hurt.
No, of course not.
But the cognitive enhancing properties, neurodegenerative, preventative properties are why people are seeking that out. Cordyceps, one of the cool anecdotes about cordyceps that I always remember from my research is in the 90s, the Chinese women's track team in the Olympics broke all these records. And, whenever you break a ton of records in the Olympics, you get drug tested. And they passed all their drug tests, and their coach credited cordyceps for increasing all of their times and breaking all their records. And I've met a ton of athletes that use cordyceps as a pre-workout. It's good for your respiratory health. You can actually get more oxygen into your lungs. And so that we make a product called Brain. That's my favorite. Besides our mushroom coffee, it's just a combination of lion's mane and cordyceps. It gives me energy and focus, and that's my daily regimen as far as microboost products. And then turkey tail, there's an amazing documentary on Netflix. If your listeners haven't seen it, it's called Fantastic Fungi. And I think anybody that watches that will be interested in mushrooms and want to know more and see if it works for them. But Paul Stamets his mom had stage 4 breast cancer. And actually, he did a TED Talk about this where she was given less than a year to live. He gave her high amounts of turkey tail for a year, and she beat breast cancer, ended up living another 15, 20 some odd years. And so the anti-cancer, anti-tumor properties of turkey tail are continuing to be researched. Like you said, chaga is really good. One thing that's popular, maybe in LA, I don't know where you are too, is the chaga chino. And I've grabbed, I just can't help myself. I see something mushrooms, I have to try it. And chaga has a lot of great properties, anti-inflammation, and so on. But chaga chino typically has about 60, 75 grams of sugar also in the cup with it too. So,
of course, let's ruin it.
So that's not the way that I would suggest taking chaga. And then reishi is known by the Chinese as the mushroom of immortality. And I know with our manufacturing company, we're putting reishi into products designed for, at the end of the day, for anti-anxiety, as a sleep aid, kind of calm the mind. But all these mushrooms, I like the metaphor when I first moved to California. I was a writer, and I got a job ghost writing this like kind of spiritual thriller, and it was all about. It was a metaphor for how the redwood forest has an interconnected root system, and it was like a metaphor for this family that was at the center of the novel. But mushrooms actually have a similar system as the redwood trees, where the redwood forest, like they can not only send information, but like nutrients to different parts of the forest that need it. And mushrooms have a root system called mycelium. It's actually the biggest living organism on Earth. In different parts of Oregon, there's over 2 square mile bodies of mycelium, of one living fungus. And there's an interesting article in The Guardian this past year where scientists show that mycelium can spread information and nutrients, but in certain sort of patterns that resemble words. And the science, like I think the headline was like, scientists discover mushrooms can speak as many as 50 words. And so I think, this is just my hypothesis that mushrooms work differently for different people, because when we take them, they're smarter than us and they know what our brain or what our body needs. And so they go to different parts of the brain or body for different people and affect them in different ways. And not just a one-time thing, but taking it over time, will help heal you. And, one part of that fantastic fungi documentary suggests that mushrooms may even be responsible for all life on Earth, right? So back in like the, what's it called, the Precambrian explosion, there was a bunch of life in the sea, but the surface of the Earth was hard rock. Now, mushroom spores can survive the depths of space. And so the hypothesis is that spores from outer space landed on a meteor or something that hit the Earth, and over 50, 60 million years, that mycelium or hyphae helped to like penetrate the surface of the Earth that is all rock, and over millions of years transform this rock into soil, into an ecological system on Earth. And so if that is true, that mushrooms are the source of human life, then maybe it's not too hard to fathom that they could also be helping us in ways beyond our comprehension.
Yeah, and communicating with ourselves about what to do to be healthier and better and function more correctly in line with, how do we kind of live in this environment in a healthier way. I wanted to go back. You reminded me of this real quick. Have you seen The Last of Us? I'm sure you've gotten like a million questions on this.
Oh yeah. So yeah, there's The Last of Us, the HBO show about mushrooms that turn you into zombies.
Right.
It's a fictional strain of mushroom. There's it's a cordyceps mushroom in the show and the video game that it's based on. But there's over 400 different types of cordyceps on Earth, right? And the ones that we use in our products are called Cordyceps militaris, and all the studies show that, good for energy and lungs. But there is a type of cordyceps found like in South America that does turn an animal into a zombie, although it's not a human. It's an ant. But there's this particular strain of cordyceps that the way that they reproduce is they infect an ant and actually can control the ant's body like a remote control car, have them go into the hive or the ant mound and give and spread the spores to all the other ants. And then eventually this mushroom will actually sprout and grow out of the ant's brain, killing them. So there is some basis for that fictional show, but not something that can affect humans. And I think that's why we have such a symbiotic relationship with mushrooms. Is our core temperature, 98.6 degrees, mushrooms can't grow and proliferate inside of us.
Yeah. Fascinating. Whenever I was preparing for this and kind of pulling some of that stuff, I was like, what was that show we watched? I remember thinking, like, is this real? And looking up the whole ant story, I was like, this is the craziest thing that I've ever heard, that a mushroom will basically take over and puppet master the ant. Incredible to show the power of these things, at least on some level, knowing that it's not possible and real in terms of affecting us is kind of nice, but it does give you the encouragement of how powerful these things can be. If they can do that and affect something, then there's got to be some other benefits if we can use them for good and use them in the right way. Let's go back to some of the functional ones. What kind of doses are we talking about? So, we mentioned lion's mane, turkey tail, cordyceps. What amount should people be getting in to kind of get over that therapeutic threshold?
This is a really important topic, Derrick. And so if your listeners go on our website, microboost.com, you can download this research article that I've done, which is how to read your mushroom label, right? So the reason why I resisted originally making our own brand of mushroom products is because I wanted to make something that was a therapeutic dose in a small form factor. And a lot of supplement companies that I talk to would say, hey, we want to put this, 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 and this in there. I say, that's great. But, you're not going to be able to fit a therapeutic dose of all of those things in there. And their comment to me is like, oh, we just want to have it on there so we can say, hey, this has lion's mane. And it doesn't make sense to me, even from a greed perspective, because, you cost so much to acquire and find new customers. Like if you just give them something that doesn't work, that seems like a waste of time and money. Yeah. But I wanted to make mushroom products, but I resisted because I saw that the suggested dosage or amount is between 800 milligrams and 3,000 milligrams. Right? And we make little small vegan soft gels and gummies, and there was no way to fit that much mushroom into a little product like that until I found this company out of Canada that is making extractions of these compounds. And so you have anything from a 8-to-1 to a 16-to-1 concentrate of these mushrooms, and it allows us now to put 1,500 milligrams equivalent into a single vegan soft gel. So right in between that suggested dose of 800 to 3,000 milligrams, our functional coffee has more mushrooms than any of our products per serving. It's 3,000 per cup, and that's split over the 5 different mushrooms we use, so 600 milligrams of each. But just a little like teaser about this how to read your label thing. There's the same company that we buy our concentrates from has a petition currently with the FDA for truth in labeling in mushrooms. And what that means is when you grow lion's mane or chaga, these commercial mushrooms, commercially, you grow them on a substrate, right? But they're not just going out to the forest and foraging for these, but a substrate that is starch, or like oats or corn or brown rice, something like that. And from that substrate, the fruiting body, or the mushroom head, stem, and cap emerges. The mycelium is the root system that first colonizes that substrate, and then the fruiting body comes out. So the fruiting body has the beneficial compounds in much larger amounts than mycelium. And so for our products, we not only take that fruiting body, but make a concentrated version of it to make it the most potent per square inch. But what I found is that a lot of mushroom companies, they'll harvest the fruiting body, use that for some other product, sell it in a farmer's market, whatever they're doing, and then actually pulverize that starchy grow substrate, and that is what they put into their mushroom supplements. So it's really difficult, when you're like selling on Amazon, for example, and our product is next to something that is, 120 pills, 600 milligrams of mushrooms. Now, some companies will say like myceliated oats, but other ones just kind of obfuscate what is actually in that product. And so what the petition is saying is that different parts of the mushroom should be labeled as such, and you shouldn't be able to call a mushroom product a mushroom if what you're actually using is just the mycelium. Now there are beneficial compounds in mycelium as well, but similar to like psilocybin, they're in less than 1%. And if you then consider that the starchy grow substrate is 90% of what is being pulverized and put into those capsules, then what you're essentially paying for is dirt when you're paying a top dollar mushroom price.
Will people have to answer, like if you ask them like, hey, is this harvested from like the fruiting body, or is this harvested from the mycelium substrate? If you ask a company that, I'm thinking about people who are getting mushrooms, like how would they find this information out?
Supplements are not regulated by the FDA. So the truth is that there's lots of different ways that people will spin the truth or just, kind of leave it out, by omission. Some brands will say, straightforward about what's in there. But if you ask the question and there any sort of dodginess of the answer, then my guess is it's probably made with the inferior substrate.
So y'all have some pretty awesome stuff on MicroBoost. So everybody go check this out. MicroBoost, like spelled with an MY, obviously. Not obviously, I just want listeners to know that. But what would be, this might be a little bit strange, but what would be your perfect like mushroom day? Like if you were scheduling when to take what would that look like for you?
Yeah, so I was a big coffee drinker before we started making our MicroBoost coffee, and I was just in Oakland a couple of weeks ago, and I was going around to some health food stores and stuff like that, and I was staying with a friend, and we were talking till 2-3 in the morning, but I had to get up at 7 and start my route, and so I had like a couple of cups of the MicroBoost coffee, my brain soft gel. I take two brain soft gels, so that's 1,500 milligrams of lion's mane and 1,500 milligrams of cordyceps. And then I had 2 cups of that coffee. I felt like I was just ready to dominate those sales calls, and I made some great friends. But our coffee, it has some caffeine. It has 55 milligrams. So, that's the equivalent of about a cup of tea, a cup of Earl Grey tea, or a third of a cup of coffee. So it still does give you some caffeine energy, but combine that with the cordyceps and the lion's mane. That's really like my entrepreneur fuel. And even like our best white label customers, I know they're hardworking men and women. I'll send them that brain formula, and they'll write me back a month later, and they're just like, "Hey, can I get some more of that?" I'm working on my website an extra 3 hours a day now, and I'm just locked in. So those are my favorite. I'm younger. I don't have the inflammation issues as much, but my parents take our immunity formula, which is a combination of chaga, turkey tail, and reishi. They take that along with like some CBDA, CBGA products that we use, and they live in Denver, pretty cold environment where people get the flu and colds often, and they stay relatively healthy. So I'm happy for that.
I love it. I have had the y'all's coffee. I have not had the brain formula, but I am definitely going to check that out. I love the idea of an easy kind of take with you, little little soft gel or something to that effect. So I'm gonna be diving in. Everybody knows how much I love mushroom, tea, coffee, any of that stuff. So I'm gonna check brain out. I haven't had the pleasure of getting the benefits of that yet.
Yeah, well, we're happy to send you some.
Bob, thank you. This has been incredible. I've got notes and all kind of things that I'm going to be diving back into and maybe re-questioning whenever I'm talking to patients about, how much of different things that they should be taking instead of, like you said, I've seen many of these where they're like, 10 mushroom types. And you're like, there's no way that we've gotten to the point where you're getting the benefits out of that. We've just spread that stuff too thin. So thank you so much for everything that you're putting out into the world. Where can people find more about you, more about Microboost, all that fun stuff?
Oh, yeah, thanks. So, yeah, Microboost with a Y, just like mycology, MYCRO, boost.com. You can follow us on Instagram at Microboost. And if you want to find the 9 articles, the 9th article for Rolling Stone is being published soon. You just search Robert Johnson, Rolling Stone, psychedelics. I write about psychedelics as well as all different types of mushrooms, and there's a ton of links. Right, I'm just a researcher. I just put all this information together in ways that I find most interesting. But every one of my articles has 10 or 15 links of much smarter people that have been doing research for years. So that's where I'd point them to.
Which one would you have people start with? I'm a little bit biased on this, but if somebody was starting with one of your articles, which one would you point them towards?
I think the one that's gotten the most response is about psychedelic therapy. It's called like mushroom therapy or psychedelic therapy and who gets to try it. And so, yeah, I talk a lot about, kind of all the angles that people are coming at this new industry from.
The psychedelic therapy could revolutionize mental health, but who gets to try it? Article, is that the one you're talking about? Yeah, very good. Loved it. Bob, this has been fantastic. I have one more question for you. We asked all our guests if somebody listening to this could do one thing today to improve their health. What would that one thing be?
Give yourself a break and love yourself more.
I love it. Bob, thank you so much, man. This has been fantastic. I'm really happy to get some of this information out there and kind of dispel a few of the myths that have persisted around some of these things for far too long. So thank you for everything that you're doing to get the good information out there, man. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. This was a great conversation.